economy, business, technology, the totality of what makes man is what we bring to you here on this Sponge. We give you the information that you need, from business to economy, to politics, to technology. And that's what we do here on this Sponge, from the beginning to the end. And that is why we are here. Keep watching this Sponge from Ben Television. And Tunde Alabi, your host. Welcome to Voice, coming to you from Ben Television. My name is Tunde Alabi. On the program today, we're taking a look at housing law, and we'll be taking a look specifically at disrepair. What is disrepair? How do you get compensation if you live in a house that is greatly disrepaired, or if you're being threatened with eviction and, well, you've not had enough comfort in the house you live as a result of disrepair? Are there opportunities, chances for you not only to maintain your stance in the house, but also to get compensated for that missing on the opportunities of enjoy the comfort of your house? There are laws in this country, and there are housing laws that both the tenants and the landlords are expected to abide by. And so on the program today, we'll be taking a look at the issue of housing disrepair. There are quite a lot of issues under housing. There's homelessness and others, but this morning and today, we'll be starting with disrepair. And joining me to take us through what the law in the United Kingdom says about housing law with reference to disrepair is Kevin Ijewere. Kevin Ijewere is of Obaseki Solicitors based here in the United Kingdom. Kevin, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Housing laws, there are quite a lot of issues on the
house. Yes, there are. Yeah.
And disrepair is one of the critical aspects.
Yes, it is.
Laws. You want to take us through when people talk about disrepair? When people with legal background talk about disrepair, and people in the housing sector department talks about disrepair, what do they mean? What is disrepair?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I think before we came on, we'll have a bit of discussion as to what disrepair was. What disrepair means to the layperson, and what it means to a lawyer before the law is totally different. Now, if I mention disrepair to someone on the streets, they probably think it's, the carpets are a bit worn, the wallpaper is crumbling. That's what disrepair is. But in legal terms, essentially, what disrepair is when you've had damage to the property as a result of the landlord not carrying out the necessary repairs to the property. So, for example, if you look around your property, look around your house, or you go into a house and you can smell damp, for example, all around the house, and you can see mold spores in the walls. It means that there's been some sort of what's called water ingress, meaning water's entered the property. And water can enter the property via various means. It could be maybe you live in a block of flats, and the flat upstairs, there's a leak and it's coming into your property, and so the water can't really leave, so you get these damp and mold spores that grow on the walls. Sometimes maybe your window sill is not properly sealed, and damp and water is coming in as well. So disrepair comes in like all different shapes and forms with regards to the legal definition of it. And so it's always best to differentiate between what the layperson thinks is disrepair and what the legal definition is. So like I said, things like blocked drains, you get a leaky roof. I mean, at Obaseki Solicitors, we've had all kinds of causes of disrepair. It could be, for example, you got a pipe that runs between your house to the adjoining house, but it's for some reason, maybe there's a crack in the structure of your house, and water's coming in. Sometimes some people, they suffer disrepair during the winter or when it rains. So there are all kinds of reasons, but essentially water has to come into the property and cause damage. It's usually water comes into property and cause damage. Other times you can have things like because of say cracks in the wall, you get pest infestation and other such like. But what your viewers should be really looking at essentially is there a leak coming into the house, for example? Are my drains blocked? When I flush the toilet, does water just come out and overflow? Are there damp and mold spores? Mold spores are little black dots that you can see on the walls of houses where bacteria has grown there. So can you smell damp, for example? If you can smell damp, then essentially there's water around there that's not being let out. It's not well aerated. So what a lot of our clients don't normally know that there's disrepair of the property until you ask certain questions, like, have you got damp and mold spores in the property? Does it smell of damp? Do you find yourself having, the house is really cold during the winter, no matter how much you put on the heater, it's really cold. That means there's some sort of like gaps in the property. And sometimes it means that when it does rain, for example, water comes in. Other times, some clients, they're very savvy, they know, they tell you, listen, that roof has been leaking for, like, since I moved in. You know, it's been like that, nothing's been done. I've spoken to the landlord and they haven't done anything. Now, legally, the landlord has obligations to carry out repairs to the property. So there are certain duties that the landlord has. So they have to carry out repairs such as, you know, make sure that, you know, the walls around the house are properly are okay. There are no cracks. You know, the bathroom, for example, if there are any leaks in the pipe, the electricity, wiring, everything has to be up to a certain standard. Obviously, there are things that the tenant has to do. For example, they have to, maybe the decorations of the house, they have to keep that up. But the structural work that needs to be done is usually done by the landlord. And what happens is sometimes we look into the tenancy agreement, which sometimes tells you who's responsible for what in the tenancy agreement. But the law itself does impose certain duties on the landlord.
Okay. Now, let's look at, you spoke about damp, molds and stuff.
Yeah.
Let's look at where you have an inclusive, all-inclusive bill into your rent.
Yeah.
And that includes your electricity, your gas and stuff. But your ethernet breaks down and you're not getting, your heater's not working. You've called your landlord and the guy keeps telling you I'm coming, and for months or weeks you haven't got, you are to resort to using the small
heaters.
Will that amount to
that would not amount to disrepair per se.
If you're paying for that service, it's inclusive.
It is inclusive.
It's not working.
It is inclusive. I mean, it depends on what we always do. We look at the tenancy agreement. Like I said, the rule of thumb is generally things like the heater breaking down. Sometimes it could be that the landlord, the tenant, is meant to look after the heater, but in most cases it is the landlord. But in that case, it won't be classed as disrepair. Okay, it'll probably be classed as a breaking of a contractual agreement between the landlord and the tenant, not disrepair as we know it legally.
So disrepair will normally apply to structural damage?
Mainly structural damage. The law has changed to the extent that it's mainly to do with structural damage, and even then the law has looked at how much structural damage there has to be. If, for example, there's plaster damage, essentially it means that, you know, obviously there's been some sort of like water ingress from the outside that has made the plaster to swell, and then there's water ingress means water's entered into the property from outside, and as such that's classed as disrepair. So essentially a lot of the things that we look at as being disrepair, as a good example you just gave, wouldn't necessarily come under the umbrella of being disrepair. Disrepair itself can be used in other forms, other areas of law. As I was explaining to you earlier on, if, for example, you're facing a warrant for possession, so basically you've been evicted.
We'll get to that. I'm just trying to look at basically what we'll classify as disrepair.
Sure.
So structural damage.
You get structural damage,
Essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, now, if part of the structural damage, say your tiles in your toilet or your bath, broken, and then
well, the structural damage will be the walls of the house, mainly the roof and the walls of the house. Not really your tiles being damaged is something that the landlord might have responsibility for, or it could be the tenant that has responsibility for it. It could be, if you've been living in a place for several years, for a long time, it's natural to expect some wear and tear as a result of just natural use.
So who will be responsible for those wear and tears?
The wear and tear, it will depend on what the contract says. The landlord could put in a tenancy agreement that you're responsible for the carpets, the wall, the wallpaper, the paint, painting the walls, just general painting and decorating. You'll be responsible for it. Okay, so the landlord might put that in the contract, but things like
people actually take time to read their contract.
The
small lines.
They don't. They don't read the small print. People just in good faith, just take on the contract, pay the deposit and just move in. The more savvy ones that have friends that are legally qualified might ask someone to read over the contract. But we've had problems where, for example, someone thinks that they're paying a deposit, but and they've paid money thinking, oh, I've paid 1 month's deposit and 1 month's rent. But when you look at the contract says it's 2 months deposit up front. So that causes some issues. So people are not always savvy. People are just like, okay, they're just happy to get the place and move in, and that's it. And then so afterwards, when there are issues, and when they come to us with issues, landlords, mainly tenants, they come to us with issues, the first thing we say to them is, have you got a copy of a tenancy agreement? Because what you're complaining of could be something that you are responsible for, and not the landlord. You might think it's the landlord's duty to fix something, whereas the landlord has expressly stated in the contract that it's your duty. Unless, of course, the law says that the landlord is responsible for that. In this case, for example, structural damage. It could be the landlord can pass on the duty to you via a tenancy.
Do you need legal advice? Do you need professional help at a reasonable cost? At Obaseki Solicitors, we have experts in property law, human rights, criminal litigation, immigration, civil litigation, family law, business law, landlord and tenant law, employment law, Sharia law. At Obaseki Solicitors, we can provide you with advice and assistance at all levels. We have over 100 years experience in serving our local communities, and we have a new maritime and international law department. We can help you. Book a free consultation today. Obaseki Solicitors, providing you with advice and assistance at all levels.
Let's move to next level, where a tenant has been asked to leave the property,
yes,
evicted, and for whatever reason the tenant has been unable to leave, and then it's resulted to the tenant being taken to a court.
Yes.
And the tenant runs to solicitor like you. How would you be looking at supporting or assisting the tenant
of course,
in this instance?
Of course. A lot of time when tenants are taken to court for possession, most of the time it's due to rent arrears. Okay. Now, what will happen is they'll come to us and say, okay, I owe X amount of money. I've been taken to court because of rent arrears. What can I do? Now, one of the defenses against some warrant for possession is you can raise the issue of disrepair. And you can use whatever compensation you're going to get from disrepair to offset what your arrears are. For example, we've had cases, quite a few of them actually, where, for example, the local authority has taken a tenant to court, say, you owe me £1,000. I want the property back. And what will happen is they come to us and then we just ask them a few questions. For example, have you got disrepair in your house? They say, oh, the roof's been leaking for years. They haven't fixed it. I've got damp and mold everywhere. You should come and see it. I don't know how we all live in, it's a 3-bedroom house, but we live in one room because the other rooms you can't even go in there and stay there. So what we generally do is we find out things like how long it's been that they've had this disrepair, this issue. Things like how much rent they pay, and then we do a calculation that I'm not going to bore you with, but I can bore you with if you want. We just take a view as to how much loss of enjoyment the client or the tenant has suffered.
Quantifiable?
It is quantifiable generally, because case law, as case law goes on, judges make decisions based on certain criteria, based on certain facts. So if the judge makes because of, for example, there was a big leak in the roof, the judge says, okay, you've suffered 20% loss of enjoyment. Then we could use that as a ballpark figure, say, okay, if a similar thing happens based on the fact that you've given us compared to the fact that judge had, and he made that decision, then we can relate it to yours. Yours could be worse, or it could be not as bad. We can take a view. And generally, you can more or less arrive at a figure that will be negotiable, if you can negotiate with when you are dealing with the other side. So essentially, when the tenants come to us and we identify that there's been disrepair, what we do, we quantify it, and then what we do then is to contact the other side and obviously raise the disrepair as a defense. And in a lot of cases we've had a situation where you've got the landlord saying the tenant owes, say, £1,000, and by the time we finish making a claim, a counterclaim for the tenant, we've discovered that actually the landlord owes the tenant £10,000, for example, because of loss of enjoyment. Loss of enjoyment, let me just explain that.
Yeah.
It's basically, if, for example, you're paying £100 a week rent, and you've got, let's say, a 2-bedroom house, for example, and then you've got disrepair, there's a leak, there's been a leak for a few years, no, it's really bad, you can't use one room, you can't use the living room. So we take a view as to how much you've actually enjoyed of the rent that you're paying. So we could say, you know what, you've been paying £100, you should be enjoying 100%, but essentially you've only enjoyed 70%. So that 30%, you need to get it back. So if, for example, like I say, your rent was £100 a week, that means you should be getting back £30 a week.
For that loss of enjoyment,
Yeah,
comfort and enjoyment.
Exactly.
As a result of that.
Exactly.
Disrepair.
Exactly. And it begins with when you give notice. Notice is one of the very early issues that we deal with disrepair. Because a landlord cannot fix what he doesn't know, if he doesn't know that a problem exists. So you can live in a house for 10 years, the roof is leaking. If you don't tell the landlord, how is he supposed to know?
So at what point do you inform? How do you inform the landlord?
Yeah.
You pick up your phone, you say, landlord, this house is leaking, I've got that here, I've got moles. That's an oral complaint, which is deniable.
Yes, it is. Absolutely right, Tunde. So what you do is you make sure you put something in writing as soon as possible.
At that point, when a tenant begins to operate at that level,
Yeah.
that's a high level of awareness of your rights.
Yes.
And driving towards something.
Yes.
You can bet it with me that 99.9% of tenants do not have that awareness.
They don't.
And they don't go that route.
They don't.
They just pick up their phone, call their landlord.
Of course.
And then the landlord keeps posting them, or even the council.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it, we've had occasions where the landlords just keep, maybe they're not serious about carrying out these repairs. They send someone in, person looks around, oh yeah, I'll be back tomorrow. You wait for them to don't come. So you just keep procrastinating. But what you need to do to cover your own back as a tenant, I mean, if there's one point that I want your viewers to take today is, when you try and give notice as soon as possible. If you feel that your place is in a state of disrepair, the roof is leaking, your toilet is overflowing when you flush it, just structural damage to the house, try and put something right into the landlord, because notice is very important. So the sooner you give notice, the sooner
written notice.
Not just calling up an email, a letter. As soon as you do that, then
you
it's
have something.
it's from that. Yeah, it's from that point you can start making a claim basically. So notice is very important.
We are at the end of the repair is not carried out.
Yeah.
And then you are now being evicted. From that point, you can now begin to.
I mean, a lot of the time, the eviction part is what disrepair comes into it is when you want to use it as a defense. As a defense. But if you live in a place, you're not in danger of being evicted. You're paying your rent every week. You're paying your rent every month. So what will happen is, but you're just living there and you're assuming that, you get used to it. Like everything else, you get used to it. When it rains, you pour a bucket out, You can't be bothered. You don't know where your rights are, essentially. So but what will happen is, hopefully as a result of people watching this program, they'll be able to say, you know what? I shouldn't have to put up with this. And what you do is, you give notice to your landlord. I wouldn't suggest you go to a lawyer straight away. You give notice to your landlord. It could be they don't know about it. You haven't told them. So when you tell them give them a call, and after the phone call, you send them something in writing further to our discussion. This is what we discussed. You say you're going to come and have a look at the place. Because what normally happens is, when you complain of disrepair, the landlord might come and have a look, but they might send what's known as a surveyor to come and look around and make a list of what the issues are and what repairs need to be carried out. So that should be the next step of a good landlord. When we deal a lot with local authorities, and that's the first thing they do. If you complain about disrepair, what they do is they send a surveyor to have a look around, compiles a report, and in that report they'll give a view as to whether or not it's disrepair. Because you just say it's wear and tear. For example, people they tend to hang their clothes on the radiators, for example. We've had cases where the surveyor might say, okay, there's been some disrepair, but when I went to view the house, we had clothes all around the radiators, the windows were drawn, the curtains were drawn, the window was closed. When I asked the tenant, how often do they put in a heater, they said, we're trying to save money, so we don't use our heater that much. So this could constitute what's
So
called.
eventually, you see the surveyor trying to put the blame back.
Exactly. So, but in essence, what it does is sort of reduce whatever compensation you may have been able to have in the first place, and surveyors tend to be instructed by local authorities, and a lot of them, the ones we dealt with, have been very, very, upfront. If there's an issue, they tell you there's an issue, but if there isn't, they'll say, listen, it's just because you're not putting the heating on, you're not opening the windows.
Before we begin to count down, of course, you know that very many people in our community, we'll talk about the African community.
Yeah.
We tend not to be bothered about a whole lot of things.
Yes.
What message do you want to pass to them as they watch this program concerning their house?
I mean,
where they live.
Yeah. The message I'd like to pass on is they should be bothered, and also the landlord has a duty towards them. When you pay a rent, and then you expect a certain level of
comfort.
Of course. You don't expect to be putting out buckets every time it rains. You don't expect the house to be covered with damp and mold if you've got children in the house, especially. There's some things you don't expect. So anything that you've paid your money, you get what you paid for. It could be if the wallpaper was peeling. A lot of people, what tends to happen is they clean the damp and mold. A lot of our clients that we have, they say, listen, I've had this problem for years. What do? I just clean it, but it comes back. I clean it, it comes back. I'm fed up, I'm tired of it. So what you do, you tend to, you have to take charge. It's your money you're paying, and you have to make sure that you get your money's worth. So that essentially.
So where you don't, you can lay claim. You can make claim.
Yeah, of course. When you move into a property, for example, most of the time it's okay, it's habitable. But as time goes on, you can tell when it's been when for example, yeah, exactly. And sometimes you can say, okay, it's the kids, they've been painting on the walls and putting the wallpaper. But other time you think, this roof is about to cave in. What's going on here? So you should, if things start falling below a certain standard, you should be able to ask the landlord to come in. And landlord will always say to you, listen, look at your tenancy agreement, you meant to fix that. Or they'll say, listen, okay, I'll sort that out. So essentially what I want your viewers to take away from it is, if you've got issues around the house that you feel is as a result of structural damage, call your landlord. You don't have to live in there. Call your landlord, tell them to come and have a look at it, and
follow with an email or a letter.
Of course.
In case you manage a written proof.
Of course.
And make a claim.
Of course.
And where you're being threatened with eviction, and you think you have not had enough level of comfort and enjoyment in the house, you could still make a claim. Say, for instance, you're being evicted because you're owing £3,000, and you feel you've been living in a house with damp, with molds, and with some levels of disrepair. Just consult your lawyer, contact your lawyer. Your landlord may be the one actually owing you. From the example of what Kevin has said to us, a landlord looking for £1,000, eventually the tenant laying claim to £10,000.
Yes.
What is he going to do at that level?
Well, they do negotiate actually, because what happens is, if you can show that there's an issue with disrepair, and there's really no point going to court after that. What you have to do is just negotiate a price, because if you're going to go to court, you have to pay for barristers, more lawyers' fees. It's going to cost you more, and you're going to lose the case. So you're going to pay not only for your legal fees, you're going to pay for the other side's legal fees. And the amount you're going to be paying out, you might as well just use it to negotiate, arrange a settlement. And just quickly, I'd like your viewers to take this. When it comes to making a claim for disrepair, notice is one thing. The other thing is you need to be able to quantify your losses, because we've had clients who, for example, the damper mold gets in their clothes. You store clothes in your wardrobe, but you get damper mold. You have to keep throwing stuff away, your coats, your shoes. So you have to keep a list.
Even the health implication on you.
Of course. The health implications of things like asthma, COPD. People that you got elderly people as well during the winter. You suffer, because mosquitoes are very dangerous. They're very dangerous. They grow. So if they get into you, they can cause complications. So make sure you talk to your GP as well, whatever issues that you're facing.
You may be able to claim.
Of course. Well, you'll be able to claim something. You'll be able to claim something. It's not all about claiming. It's first and foremost, what we do is make sure that your property gets put back to the way it should be.
And also enjoy the work.
Of course.
All right, Kevin, because of our time. Kevin Ijewere is a solicitor at Obaseki Solicitors based here in London. If you do have questions, you can text the phone number you see on your screen, or you can get back to us. Join us on Twitter at Tunde C3, and we'll be able to ask answer your question or get in touch with your solicitor, better still, contact Obaseki Solicitors in London. This is how far I can go on the program today. Next program, we'll be looking at other areas of housing law. Today, we've spoken about disrepair. Probably next time, we'll be taking a look at homelessness, where you've been made homeless. You have a child, or you've got children, you're a single mom, or even a single dad. Does that exist, single dad?
They do. They do exist.
We're not going to talk about that, but we're looking at homelessness. We know it's a very difficult thing living in London, but you still do have some chances. Nobody, no child is expected to be homeless. Am I right?
Yes.
Absolutely. So there are chances.
No British child.
No British
no child in general, but you got British.
General, but
It gets.
Children, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for being part of our program today. I'll see you again next week. Kevin, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Have a very good evening. Bye. Makes man is all bring to you here on this sponge. We give you the information that you need, from business to economy to politics to technology, and that's all we do here on this sponge, from the beginning to the end, and that is why we are here. Keep watching this sponge from Ben Television.